All right, welcome, welcome. So my name is Melanie Julian. You can call me MJ. I will be facilitating the parent education sessions at Trinity for CFLS, and I'm very excited. So I decided to record our session, and hopefully you will have access to our discussion today. And I will be sharing my screen. So feel free to follow along, and if you want to follow up with what we discussed today, feel free to send me an email at mjulion@cflsdc.org and we can continue our conversation. So today we are discussing rewards and punishments as forms of discipline and alternatives to spanking. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second. While I figure it out. All right. Perfect. So I can no longer see you, but you should see my screen. So today we're talking about rewards and punishments. And rewards and punishments are types of discipline that we can use when we're talking about parenting our child and what that can actually look like and actual techniques to help them to be able to distinguish right from wrong. So rewards actually teach children um, how to cooperate by following rules that have been set out by the family. So following family rules. So when we're talking about both rewards and punishments, it's first important to start with family rules. So establishing your family rules, making sure your little one is able to understand what those rules are. So you can go over these rules every day, and also understanding what the consequences are for not following the rules, and then offering rewards when they do offering rewards when they do follow your rules can be great reinforcements and encouragement for them to continue to follow the rules and for to build their self-esteem and confidence as well. Having some technical issues here. All right. So rewards teach children again that by cooperating and following the family rules, there are positive, logical consequences and positive payoffs. So you want children to understand that by participating and following your rules, there will be rewards to reinforce their behavior, and that's exactly what rewards do. So think about the rewards that you may currently have for your little one in place. That may be praise, gentle touch, privileges. Rewards can either be tangible or intangible, and we'll talk about rewards and possible rewards that you can use to implement with your child. When we're talking about punishments, punishments are logical consequences used when children purposely choose not to follow your family rules. And punishments help children learn what is inappropriate and that these inappropriate behaviors have consequences. And these can act as guides for them to make better choices next time. Because when we are punishing, we always want to make sure that it is correcting any behavior that we don't want to see again. So, some examples of punishment are timeout, being grounded, loss of privilege, restitution, or paying back, or even expressing parental disappointments can be an effective form of punishment. And we'll again go deeper into these types of punishment and what that can actually look like. So take some time to think about what your punishment techniques are and how effective they've been for you. And feel free to share. So when we're talking about both rewards and punishments, I mentioned logical consequences. So our both rewards and punishments must have logical consequences in order for them to have value. Consequences must follow as a means of reinforcing your expectations. So some examples of consequences, they can either be natural or logical, like I mentioned. Natural consequences are things like getting burned if you touch the stove. That's a natural consequence of touching a hot stove. A logical consequence would be something like a planned time out for a behavior that you don't want to see, something that really requires thought. So making sure that the behavior or action is relative to the consequence is important as well. So some benefits of consequences are that they help children distinguish right from wrong, and this is how children learn morals. It helps children to develop a strong moral code to follow, which are values. Children need values, and they need both positive punishments or rewards and punishments. So these are things that children need to reinforce their behavior. They also help children to make good, healthy choices, not only as children, but later in adulthood as well. And they help children to feel successful in following the rules and pleasing their parents. So we will get into some, let's practice some of these if and then statements. These are some statements that you can use for your child to reinforce your expectations. So, an example of an if and then statement could be something like, if you don't sit down in your chairs, then you will have to go to timeout. So, for example, if your child is standing in his chair, using an if and then statement to get him not to stand on the chair can be a good choice for you to use. So, practice your if and then statements. They can be very effective, it can be very simple, but always pointing out what the child is doing. So the if statement is what the child is doing, and the then statement is the parent's response to that behavior. And whether that behavior is good or bad, you can use these if and then statements. Let's see. So when we're talking about good discipline really involves these logical consequences, but also providing non-abusive nurturing touch or a nurturing voice along with these consequences are a great way to help children to improve on their behavior. So think about how you may have in the past used if and then statements, and how you can kind of change that to be a more nurturing approach. So some logical consequences as punishments. What does that really look like? So when we're talking about punishments, some things that we are talking about are loss of privilege, being grounded, restitution, as I mentioned, parental disappointment, timeout. These punishments can be really effective forms of punishment. And in order for any type of discipline, any type of punishment to be effective, quality parent child time must be present. So you must have a good foundation of trust, good times, and positive recognition for your child to even understand your punishments. So that's something to keep in mind. So loss of privilege, what does this look like? Loss of privilege can look different based on your age group. So for 2.5-year-olds and older, loss of privilege can look like, taking away screen time, taking away toys, or even, access to certain things that may not be tangible. Being grounded, what does that look like for a 2.5-year-old? So extending that loss of privilege can be something that will work for a 2.5-year-old or older. So being grounded could be taking their tablet for the week, something like that. You always want to make sure you're using appropriate consequences as a punishment for grounding, especially based on the child's age. So, restitution, what that can look like for a 2 year old. Restitution, usually, when you think of it, you usually think about forms of money. So, if you had a teen, you probably have them, if they were to break something, for example, in the house, you probably have your team pay for that out of their allowance. But for a 2 year old or younger, they obviously don't have income. So, what can paying back look like? What can restitution look like? Really brainstorm that for yourself and even for your own child. All of these can look different. So, even restitution for, like I mentioned, a younger child could look like paying back in chores. So, if you broke something in the kitchen, then paying back would look like washing dishes. And this is obviously for a little bit older child, not a 2 year old. But something like that could be a really great form of restitution. One thing that I really like to do as a form of punishment for my two little ones, well, actually, I have a 2.5 year old, so he's really just starting to understand punishments and things like that. But for my 4 year old, I use parental disappointment a lot, which can be very effective for expressing how you feel about the child's actions and behavior. And that really works quite effectively. So, expressing disappointment can look something like, I feel mommy's so disappointed that you hit your brother. It really makes me sad when you hit your brother. So that is a great, actually, I say that every day. So that's definitely something that you can use to express disappointment. And based on the severity, it can kind of look different. Even for older children, expressing disappointment can be really effective. I remember when I was a teenager and my mom, I did something. I went to get my belly button pierced and I wasn't supposed to. And I remember my mom found out and she just said, "Melanie, I'm so disappointed in you." And that was really enough of the punishment that I needed to feel completely guilty about it. So even something as little as that can be a great form of punishment and even enough punishment for your child. Timeout is something that we'll dive deeper into because timeout is a very effective form of punishment, especially for children 3 years old and older. Timeout is the systematic removal of the child for their own quiet time. So removing them to a completely separate area. And again, timeout can be very effective. Obviously, for older children, timeout may not work as effectively. But definitely when we're talking about parenting younger children, timeout can be a very effective form of punishment. So rules, when it comes to discipline, there are some rules that we have to consider. Rule one is help discipline actually helps children to learn appropriate behavior. So discipline is a must. A lot of times we think about discipline as negative punishment, but discipline is really helping children learn what's appropriate and learn what's right, what's wrong. So children need discipline. It doesn't always have to be negative punishment, harsh. Discipline can be, very simple strategies that we use over time. All behaviors need consequences, I should say. So we talked about our if and then statements. All behaviors have a consequence. So we have to encourage and really help children understand what that looks like. It can either be a reward or a good consequence or a negative consequence. So rule three, what you pay attention to is what you get more of. And that's so big when we're talking about discipline. If you don't want to see a certain behavior, you really have to ignore it because the more you pay attention to it, the more the child will do it. Punishments are used to help children change inappropriate behavior. That should say. Punishments are never used to abuse. So keep that in mind. A lot of times when we think about punishments, it kind of goes hand in hand with abuse and physical violence. But punishments are not that. And when punishments are coupled with physical violence, they don't work. So that's something to keep in mind. Rule 6, time out will only work if time in is quality time. So you really do have to have a firm, strong foundation with your little one, making sure that if you do send them to time out, that they're going to miss out on all the fun. So you want to make sure that you are spending good quality time with your child so that they're like crushed when they have to go to timeout. Timeout should be used sparingly. That's rule number 7. So don't always send your child to timeout because it will work less effectively. If you do, it won't really mean much. Making sure that you have, and we'll go deeper into timeout, but use it sparingly because you don't want to overuse it and they just, not really think of it as a punishment. Thinking of it as like a playtime can be really hard to do if you don't have certain boundaries set up for your timeout. So 8, punishment must fit the crime. This is very important. So I even recommend making a list of consequences for breaking certain rules that you have set. So that way you know exactly what these punishments are and making sure that they fit the crime and are suitable for your child's age. Punishments must be meaningful and quick. So again, making a list of your punishments can be really effective so you know what they are on hand and can, quickly take care of your situations. Rule 10, if you misuse it, you lose it. That's a great rule when we're talking about disciplining your child, especially for older children. Even for younger children, if they misuse or break their toy, taking away that toy can be a great lesson in teaching them how to use their toys appropriately. And if you break it, you pay for it. That's restitution. So for our little ones, like if they break something around the house, understanding that they can do something, whether it's helping you clean it up, can be a great way to pay that back. And also, the biggest rule when it comes to discipline is never punish your babies. Children who are under 2 years old, or even if depending on certain circumstances, they may not understand what punishment looks like. They may not be able to distinguish right from wrong just yet developmentally. So you want to make sure to never punish your babies. So let's talk about some tangible and intangible rewards. This includes praise, touch, privileges. I would love to hear any examples that you have, that you do, that you implement with your child as far as rewards, objects, allowances. For my little ones, they really like my 2 and 4-year-old. They really like stickers. Obviously, that's a great reward that you can give. They also like one parent mentioned little snacks. So that's a great reward as well. And again, tangible rewards are things. So like I mentioned, snacks, stickers. Intangible rewards are privileges, praise, even facial expressions, high fives, thumbs up. Anything that you can do to really celebrate your child are some awesome rewards. Praising your child for their behavior is probably one of the best rewards, I feel like, because they can offer unconditional love and support. It can help boost self-esteem. It can help encourage good behavior, and also just help you feel good by giving praise and compliment, but also help your little one feel good too for receiving those compliments. So praise your child all the time. Praise them for being and praise them for doing. Noticing and appreciating the person is praising them for being. So take some time to think of what that can look like for your little one. What praises do you give your little one just for being and appreciating who they are and noticing who they are? And also praise for doing. So noticing, really paying attention what they're doing, paying attention to the little efforts that they're making, the learning and the development that they're doing. Pay attention to those things and praise them for doing them, even if it's something really small, like tying your shoe or putting your pants on. These little small efforts really do deserve praise. So, again, when you're praising your child, praise for being and praise for doing. One thing to keep in mind is that you never want to combine the goodness of a person's being with their efforts. When you do this, you have to keep the two separate, because when you do this, it kind of gets people confused with um, them doing something and their self-worth. So you never want to praise both being and doing together. Pay attention to the behaviors that you want and praise them when they appear. Always praise them when they appear, so that they know that they're doing something that you like. Accepting praise from others is an important part in recognizing your own self worth. So, as a parent, it's important that you understand too and acknowledge how to accept praise. Touch is a great way to show your pleasure by combining it with praise for being and doing. So, sealing your praise with a hug or a high five is definitely a great thing to implement. Some nurturing touch can really help solidify what you're saying to your little one. So, some things to review when we're talking about praise. You want to focus your attention on the child and the situation. So definitely be very attentive to what you're praising. Move close to your child, make eye contact with your child on your child's level. Gently touch your child. So again, using that nurturing touch can really help seal the deal. For positive communication, positive body language, those kind of things. You want to look pleasant. You want to smile, praise your child for being or for doing. And then still offer a hug. Those are some things that you can do to effectively praise your child. So take some time this week to practice giving and receiving praise for being and giving and receiving praise for doing. And be sure not to combine the two. And a lot of times, this may be foreign to you, because it was definitely foreign to me, just having to give people praise and even receiving praise and just saying thank you. So when you receive praise this week, don't offer praise back. Don't try to explain. Just say thank you. And that's it. So practice those things. And then the more comfortable you get with receiving praise and giving praise, the more you'll be able to do the same with your child. It'll just come naturally. So it really does take some time to practice. So let's get into timeout as an effective strategy for punishment. Timeout will work only if, again, quality time is spent with your child. So making sure that you are, being intentional about the time that you spend with your child, playing with your child, reading to your child. All these things can help enforce quality time, so that when they are misbehaving and you do have to send them to timeout, they know exactly what that looks like. So before using timeout, we talked about establishing our family rules. That's so important. So some of the rules that I have around my house with my two little ones are no yelling, no hitting, um, no yelling, no hitting. What else? I think those are our two that we struggle with the most. So establishing, then they know what their rules are. So when we have daily conversations, they can tell you what our rules are. And so they know the rules. Establish your rules. Make sure the child understands that if they don't follow these rules, then they will go to timeouts, and they know that. So pick a timeout place. This is very important. Making sure you set up an area in your home or an area where your child knows that is their place to be and go when they aren't acting appropriately, where they can take some time out to breathe, do some meditation, whatever you have them doing, or just sitting at the wall, whatever you have them doing, however you have it set up in their timeout place, making sure they know what's expected of them. And also establish how long timeout will be. So that's very important. Again, making sure that it's age appropriate. Usually for children, the suggestion is 1 minute for each year. So for a 4-year old, that would be 4 minutes. But this can also change depending on the severity of the situation. So if your child is in timeout for hitting, that may be longer than if your child is in timeout for, say, whining or something like that. So think about, the severity of the behavior that you're trying to change, and you can correlate with, however you choose to. So I would love to hear some times where timeout may have been effective for you or may have not been effective, in some ways that you can kind of change or adjust your situation to have it work more effectively. You can always remedy your situation. You can start over, establish new family rules, making sure the child knows exactly what those rules are again, and kind of go from there. So when we're using timeouts, I have some tips for you. So you want to make sure you give your child one warning, choose choices and consequences. So those if and then statements. Again, if you don't get off of the chair, then you'll have to go to timeout. So if you don't stop standing on the chair, we'll have to go sit in timeout. If the behavior continues, if the child is continuing, tell the child that he or she will be going to timeout. Ignore all promises designed to avoid going to timeout. This is what the little ones love to do. They love to say, "Oh no, mommy, I'm sorry. I promise I won't do it again." Blah blah blah. Whatever they say, ignore it because I promise you, they will be back doing it again. So you always want to make sure again that you're following through with your consequences too, because if you don't, they won't follow through with the promises they're making here. So tell the child how long the timeout will last, making sure they know. You can even get a timer, especially for your timeout, so that they know when it beeps, you can join us again. And that's a great tool to implement. 5, remind child that timeout starts when he or she is quiet. So if they're still whining, if they're still doing their tantrum, timeout has not even started yet. Okay. So making sure that they understand that. After timeout, praise and redirect child to appropriate behavior. So that's one thing that you must do after timeout is over. So making sure to praise them. One thing that I always use timeout for my 4-year-old, I use it every day. He knows exactly what he has to do in timeout. Usually timeouts are either because he's hitting or whining or just not listening. So he knows he's going to timeout and he's going to sit there. He's going to take 3 or 4 deep breaths and meditate with his eyes closed. And when timeout is over, I always praise him, tell him he did a great job doing that, and I ask him to come join us again. And he's usually feeling a lot better. And he even talks about how he not enjoys timeout, but it's something that he recognizes that he needs in that moment. So let me know your experiences with timeout for your little one. How has it worked for you? And what would you do or are going to implement differently so that it can work better for you? So why parents spank their children? Let's talk about it. So obviously, sometimes there are situations where parents don't feel that timeout or even rewards and punishments are effective for their child. Some people believe just because of personal history, some reason that they spank their child, teaching them right from wrong as a form of punishment, as an act of love. If you spank your child, or if you've been spanked as a child, I would love to hear, the reasons as to why. Some believe it teaches respect. Some parents spank their child when they're angry based on religious writings. Cultural practice is just the norm to prepare children for the world around them. That's a lot of reasons why parents spank their child. And it's important to keep in mind that corporal punishment, as well as verbal punishment, is not really appropriate. It doesn't nurture our child's development. It actually causes lasting trauma, and it's not an effective form of punishment. So we'll be talking more about nurturing forms of punishments, but these are common reasons as to why parents spank their child. And these are practices that have been in place since the very beginning of time. Since prehistoric times, parents were spanking their children, yelling, belittling their children, using other forms of verbal and physical forms of punishments. But alternative forms of discipline we've known and studied over time can be very effective for not only the child's development, self esteem, and well being, but also when they grow and develop as children, as adults, and the relationships that they establish over time as well. Redirection. So when we're talking about punishments, even physical punishments, using redirection is a great parenting technique and alternative to help children learn appropriate behavior. And there are different types of redirection, verbal and physical. And parents can use redirection to prevent physical personal injury, promote desirable behavior, reduce punishing interactions, promote learning and exploration, which is obviously something that we definitely want to do with younger children. We don't want to punish them too harshly where they're scared or not able to explore their environment or not be curious about learning. So that's often what spanking and other whoopings and other forms of punishments is limiting for children. So let's talk about some verbal redirection as an alternative to spanking. So verbal redirection involves managing a child's behavior by verbally addressing a command or request. And this can include directing a child's behavior and attention to more appropriate activities and avoiding unnecessary conflicts. So I use verbal redirection all the time, and it's very important for verbal redirectioning for younger children. You want to be very direct and precise so they know exactly what behavior they're doing that they shouldn't be. Because if you're too vague, then they will just continue to do whatever it is that you're saying. And a great example of this, and I do this probably every day as well, saying, get down, as opposed to saying, get down, don't stand on the chairs, put your bottom on the chairs, please, have a seat, things like that, so that they know exactly what they're doing and what they shouldn't be. So think of some verbal redirections that you use on a daily basis and really think about how you can address these requests or comments to be more specific, to be more age appropriate for the child to understand exactly how they can redirect their own behavior. And then eventually, as you are doing these techniques, your child will start to pick up on correcting their own behavior and redirecting their own behavior. So that's the awesome thing about these techniques. Eventually the child will start to understand that they can do these things by themselves without needing you to tell them to. So physical redirection is managing a child's behavior by verbally addressing a command or request and using nurturing touch to redirect the child. And this is the ideal way to redirect your child, both combining verbal redirection and physical redirection. So this can look like, for example, if your child is in the kitchen with you while you're cooking and they're trying to grab something from the stove, instead of just slapping the child's hand away from the stove, or instead of just yelling, telling them to get out the kitchen, which is something I do sometimes, physical redirection actually involves escorting your child out of the kitchen and engaging the child in play in another room while explaining to them that the kitchen is not a safe place to play right now while mommy's cooking. You can get burned if you touch the stove. So you can even redirect their behavior by, if they have like a kitchen area of toys set up, helping them play in their own kitchen type thing, or just redirecting them and demonstrating or modeling to them how they can play safely, without coming in the kitchen. So, explain to them that the kitchen isn't a play area right now, that they can play here until you're finished cooking. So that's physical redirection. Remembering to include nurturing touch as you are redirecting your child. So physically guiding them into the other room, rubbing their back as you are playing with them, or something like that, to kind of help them understand. Um, and it kind of makes it not as harsh, or you're not like screaming at them, telling them to get away or get out. So it's less harsh to the child. And so that they're better able to understand, and play on their own until you're ready to join them again. All right. So ignoring is another alternative to spanking that I like to use and encourage you to try as well. Ignoring is used to reinforce or eliminate behaviors of children that parents find especially irritating. And this can definitely look like whining. Definitely one of the things that I work on and use ignoring for. It also communicates disapproval by deliberately not paying attention in words or actions. So remember, by paying attention to the undesirable behavior, parents are actually encouraging children to perform that behavior. So ignoring is really great here because we're not paying any attention or giving the child any momentum to continue that behavior. So I find this especially works for tantrums, and again, whining, fake crying, things that you do want to keep in mind with ignoring is that you do have to assess the degree of potential harm to the child or to others. So you want to make sure that the child is not hitting or being a harm to themselves. You obviously don't want to ignore that type of behavior. If they're potentially causing damage to your home or to any other property, you obviously don't want to ignore that as well. So before ignoring, decide what behaviors you want to see instead. So I'll use my example of whining, and I do this again every day. So when my 4-year-old starts to whine, he knows mommy doesn't like that, and I'll remove myself from the room until he's done whining, until he realizes that I'm not paying him any attention. So decide what behaviors you want to see instead. So instead of whining, he knows that he needs to use his words and explain to me what he needs, or explain to me what's the matter. Be sure you can tolerate ignoring it. And this is definitely something that you have to keep in mind. If you can't tolerate the whining for like 20 to 30 minutes, then that may be something you have to work toward ignoring. And that's totally fine. Whining was definitely something I had to work toward ignoring because it was just so irritating to me that I couldn't ignore it. But now I remove myself. So that's what happens. And my 4-year-old knows that once he starts whining, mommy is going to excuse herself. So you don't want to remove the child from the area because that would be paying them attention. But if you can either sit there and just daydream and ignore it, that's a great way to do it. Or like me, you can remove yourself from the room safely, go into another room and start doing something. But you have to ignore the behavior 100% of the time. So, how to ignore, you want to pay no attention to the behavior. And then when the behavior stops, you praise the child immediately. And another thing that really works for me is convincing others to ignore the behavior. So, I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So, my 4-year-old starts whining. When my 4-year-old starts whining, I usually say to my 2-year-old, let's go to another room until Messiah is done whining. Let's read a book until Messiah is done whining, or something like that. Convincing the other child to remove themselves as well. So then Messiah is just in the room by himself whining. And then he realizes that that's not fun and he stops whining almost immediately. So when you are ignoring, you don't want to ignore the child, just ignore the behavior. So when Messiah is done whining, then he can join us again. Or if he's doing something while I'm ignoring his whining, I'm not going to ignore that behavior. I'm just going to ignore his whining, if that makes sense. So definitely practice ignoring. Think about the behaviors. I feel like for ignoring, you have to do it for very specific behaviors. And even with any of the other techniques that we mentioned, using them for very specific, predictable behaviors so your child knows exactly what to expect can be a very good strategy. So, like I mentioned for ignoring, when my 4-year-old starts whining, he knows that mommy is going to ignore it. So that can be a very predictable thing. Eventually, over time, he'll stop whining altogether because he doesn't like when I ignore him. He doesn't like to be left out of story time, and doesn't like to, not play with his little brother and mommy. So think about some behaviors that you would use for the different strategies that we talked about today. And I would love to hear how you do in practicing these strategies. So, some things that you can think about this week are identifying one behavior you would like to modify. This could be tantrums, this could be whining, this could be hitting. Think about when it occurs, how would you like to see, or what would you like to see instead? And think about what you've tried in the past. This can also help you shape how you use different techniques or different punishments, different consequences for different things. And what can you do to help ignore the behavior? So, some behaviors obviously can be ignored, but with ignoring, you do have to be able to tolerate whatever behavior it is that you're trying to ignore, and that takes a lot of strength for parents. So definitely practice that. Think about some things that you can do to help you ignore, whether that be daydreaming, meditation, chanting, saying something to yourself, doing mantras or whatever, affirmations, saying something to yourself to help you ignore whatever that behavior is. And that's definitely something I had to do with ignoring the whining, which has gotten a lot better since I've started ignoring it. So definitely practice, practice, practice. Parenting takes practice, and it takes a lot of us undoing what we've learned and what we know. A lot of the practices that our parents use to parent us, for example, may not have been the most nurturing approaches to parenting. And a lot of times, even if we don't want to adopt those same parenting techniques, we kind of do so out of habit because it's natural, it's what we saw, it may be cultural. So, really think about your own childhood and the fondest memories that you may have as a child, and think about how you can encourage and influence those same memories for your children as well. And even on the flip side of that, think about how you learn discipline. So if you were spanked, if you got whoopings, beatings, whatever you call it, really think about how that has impacted your relationships, your ability to parent, or how you parent, and some of the things that you've picked up from your parents that you may not have wanted to pick up or do on your child. So think about some of those things and how you can implement uh, techniques such as rewards and punishments, to or redirection, timeouts, these type of punishments to help your child learn discipline. Because again, those are some of the things that we want to encourage: positive self discipline, helping children to understand right from wrong, helping children to understand morals and values. And of course, since we are their first teachers, we definitely want to make sure that we can set a good example by modeling the same behaviors as well. So this week, I do also want you to think about the rules, your family rules, establishing your family rules if you haven't done so already. And even if you have, thinking about how you are modeling following those rules as well. So if you find that you have family rules that you are not able to follow, acknowledging that to your child can be helpful as well. Making sure that you follow those rules can help them follow the rules too. So that concludes the information that we'll be talking about today. I hope you found it very helpful in discussing rewards and punishments and offering alternatives to spanking, alternatives to whoopings and beatings and physical punishments by using timeout, redirection, verbal and physical redirection, and in implementing rewards and praise and nurturing touch to help you get the desired um, behavior from your little ones. So I wish you the very best this week as you are journeying through your parenting with your little one. And feel free to email me with any questions that you may have. And I look forward to hearing from you and connecting with you very soon. All right. See you soon.